What if some of the plants Americans spend the most money on for stress, energy, clean beauty, and even pet care could be grown right in a backyard or a few patio containers? Honestly, the biggest mistake most people make is thinking real value comes from buying more health products, when the smarter move might be growing the plants behind them yourself. Most people think useful plants are just things like tomatoes, basil, or maybe a few herbs in a raised bed. But honestly, some of the plants Americans spend the most money on for stress relief, better sleep, clean beauty, specialty cooking, and even pet care are things you could actually grow much closer to home than you think. This isn't just about gardening. It's about spending smarter, growing with more control, and seeing real value in plants most people overlook. And later in this video, I'll show you one plant people treat like a weed, and another that sounds almost ridiculous until you realize how much money Americans spend on their pets. Section 1. Lemon Balm. Let's start with lemon balm, because this one is easy to understand right away. In the US, people already buy it in calming teas and sleep blends all the time. It feels simple, gentle, and familiar. But here's the thing. Lemon balm isn't just a relaxing tea herb. Research suggests it may help support calm and sleep, which is why it keeps showing up in wellness products. And instead of spending money on those products again and again, you could use that same money to pick up a plant from Home Depot, Lowe's, or a local nursery and grow it in a container or raised bed. That's the real shift. It stops being just another product you buy and becomes something you actually control. You can clip it fresh, use it often, and keep it growing right outside your door. And honestly, that's what makes it so appealing. It's easy, useful, and fits naturally into everyday life. You can brew it as tea, mix it with mint, or add it to simple summer drinks. And this is where it gets interesting. The next plant takes that same idea of everyday use, but in a much sweeter direction. Section 2. Stevia. Now let's talk about stevia, because this one hits a very different part of everyday life. Americans spend a huge amount of money trying to cut back on sugar, whether that means diet drinks, sugar-free products, or little packets of sweetener. But here's the surprising part. Stevia doesn't just belong in processed products. It starts as a plant, and that changes the whole way you look at it. Instead of buying one more better-for-you substitute, you could grow something useful in a container, on a patio, or in a small raised bed. That's what makes stevia so interesting. It connects health, convenience, and control all at once. For the cost of a few store-bought products, you could start growing your own sweet herb at home. And honestly, that one-time setup can feel a lot smarter than constantly buying the same solution in a different package. You can use it in tea, homemade herb blends, or just as a reminder that some of the things people spend money on every week can actually start in the garden. And it doesn't stop there, because the next plant takes us from sugar control into something even more connected to modern stress and burnout. Section 3. Tulsi next is tulsi, or holy basil, and this is where the wellness angle starts to feel a little deeper. In the US, tulsi shows up in adaptogen teas and stress support blends, especially for people who feel constantly tired, wired, and mentally overloaded. But here's the thing. Tulsi isn't just another trendy herb. It has a long history of everyday use, and modern research keeps exploring its role in stress support and overall wellness. That's a big reason it keeps gaining attention. And this is where it gets interesting. Instead of always paying premium prices for tea blends and wellness products, you could grow tulsi yourself in a container, a patio setup, or a small backyard herb bed. It's one of those plants that gives you both usefulness and a sense of control. You can brew it as tea, blend it with lemon balm, or just keep it as part of a simple wellness garden. And honestly, the next plant is even more interesting because most people know it from supplement bottles, not from the garden. Section 4. Ashwagandha. Now we get to ashwagandha, and this one really shows how far people have drifted from the source of what they buy. Most Americans know it as a supplement, not as a plant. But here's the thing. Ashwagandha became popular for a reason. It's closely tied to stress support products, and that's why it keeps showing up in capsules, powders, and gummies. And instead of only paying for the finished product, some growers can start looking at the plant itself, especially in warmer areas or small raised bed setups. That's the real reframe. It stops being just another bottle on a shelf and becomes something more tangible. And the next plant takes that same idea even further, because people are already spending money on it in green powders all over America. Section 5. Moringa. That plant is moringa. And honestly, most people in the U.S. know it from superfood powders, smoothie mixes, and health brands that market it as something clean, green, and nutrient-dense. But here's the surprising part. Moringa isn't just a powder trend. In the right climate, it can be a very practical plant to grow. That's what makes it so interesting. Instead of buying expensive greens products again and again, you start seeing the plant itself as the real value. For someone with a warm backyard, a large container, or even greenhouse support, moringa can shift from something you order online to something much closer and more useful. And this is where it gets interesting. The next plant moves us out of the wellness aisle and into the kind of herb restaurants actually get excited about. Section 6, Shiso next, is shiso, and this is where things shift from wellness to flavor. In the U.S., most people notice shiso in sushi spots or Japanese dishes, usually as a garnish. But here's the thing, shiso is much more than that. It has a bold, distinctive flavor, and that's exactly why chefs and adventurous home cooks care about it. Research also points to compounds like rosmarinic acid, which helps give it a little more depth than just interesting herb. And this is where it gets interesting. Instead of paying restaurant prices for that experience, you could grow shiso in a container, a raised bed, or a small backyard patch. It's one of those plants that feels premium but can actually be very approachable. You can use it with rice bowls, grilled meat, wraps, or homemade sushi nights. And the next plant goes even further, because it's something many people want fresh but regular grocery stores still don't do very well. Section 7, Cilantro. Now we get to cilantro, and a lot of Americans still confuse it with cilantro. But here's the thing, for people who actually cook with it, cilantro is not a substitute. It has a stronger, deeper flavor, and in many dishes, that difference really matters. That's what makes it valuable. It's something people genuinely want, but regular grocery stores often don't carry it fresh or consistently. And for a small grower, that gap can be the opportunity. It grows well in warm conditions and can work in containers, backyard spaces, or protected setups. You'll find it in soups, broths, sofrito, curries, and marinades. And the next plant is even more interesting because it isn't just useful, it tells a uniquely American story. Section 8, Yaupon Holly. Next is Yaupon Holly. And this one feels different right away because it tells a very American story. Most people have never heard of it, but it's actually the only native North American plant with caffeine. And here's why that matters. In a country obsessed with coffee, tea, and energy, that makes yaupon more than just an interesting shrub. It becomes a local alternative with real identity. Instead of always looking overseas for the next special drink, this points back to something that was here all along. It works best in warmer regions and makes more sense as a long-term backyard plant than a quick patio herb. But that's exactly what gives it character. And the next plant takes us in a completely different direction because it looks like a simple flower, until you realize people are already paying for what it can become. Section 9, Calendula. Now let's talk about calendula because this is one of those plants people often see as just a pretty flower. But here's the thing. Calendula crosses over into something much more useful. It shows up in salves, soaps, oils, and clean skincare products, which gives it a value most backyard growers never think about. That's what makes it interesting. It's easy to grow in a raised bed, container, or backyard border, but it doesn't stay in the ornamental category for long. Once you see it as an ingredient, everything changes. And honestly, that shift from decoration to function is where the opportunity starts. And the next plant pushes that idea even further, because it isn't just uncommon, it creates a flavor experience almost nothing else can copy. Section 10. Sichuan Pepper. Next is Sichuan pepper, and this one is different because it's not just flavor, it's an experience. That numbing, electric sensation is exactly why chefs and serious home cooks keep coming back to it. And here's the thing, you can't really fake what it does. That gives it a kind of built-in value. It's not a basic spice, and that's why it stands out. For the right grower, it also represents something bigger. You do not have to compete with commodity crops when you can grow something memorable. And the next plant may be even more surprising because a lot of people already have it in their yard and still don't realize it has value. Section 11. Purslane. Now here's where it gets really surprising. Purslane. A lot of people see it as just another weed and pull it out without a second thought. But here's the thing. Purslane is actually an edible plant with real nutritional value, and that completely changes how you see it. What most people treat like yard waste can become something useful, flavorful, and even marketable. That's what makes it so powerful. It grows easily, handles tough conditions, and doesn't ask for much. And honestly, that may be the biggest reframe in this whole video. Sometimes the plant with value is the one people have been ignoring the entire time. And the last plant on this list might sound even more ridiculous at first, until you remember how much Americans love spending money on their pets. Section 12. Catnip. And finally, catnip. Honestly, this one sounds like a joke until you think about how people in the U.S. actually spend money. Americans may hesitate to buy things for themselves, but when it comes to pets, that hesitation disappears fast. That's why catnip is more interesting than it looks. It's not just a playful plant. It connects directly to a huge pet market where simple products can still carry real value. And because it grows easily in containers, backyard beds, or small garden spaces, it fits the same pattern we've seen all through this video. Useful, overlooked, and much closer to home than most people think. So when you step back and look at all of these plants together, the bigger lesson becomes clear. A lot of the things people spend money on for health, flavor, comfort, and lifestyle do not start in a bottle, a package, or a store shelf. They start as plants. And once you realize that, gardening stops feeling like just a hobby. It starts to feel like a smarter way to think about value. You don't need a massive farm to grow something meaningful. Sometimes a few containers, a raised bed, or one backyard corner is enough to start changing the way you spend, the way you eat, and the way you think about useful plants. Because here's the real takeaway. The smartest plants to grow are not always the most obvious ones. They're often the ones hiding behind products people already buy every week without thinking twice. So now I want to ask you, which one would you actually try growing first? Would you start with the calming herbs, the chef herbs, or one of the weirdly overlooked plants like purslane or catnip? And if you enjoy videos that connect gardening, practical health value, and smart plants worth growing in the U.S., make sure you subscribe. There's a lot more to explore, and honestly, we're just getting started.